Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, take a look at the different articles relevant for your examination, be it for the prelims or the mains or the interview process, and also take a look at how to create answers if a question is asked from those particular topics. Now, if you want to avail the PDF, the annotations of the existing session, then you can always join the Telegram link and you can download the PDF from here. Now, having said that, let us take a look at the topics that we are going to have a discussion for today. So today in total, we are going to have a discussion for around 9 different topics, 6 of them in slightly greater detail relevant for your mains examination, and 3 of them where we are going to extract something which is relevant for the prelims examination out here. Now, if we start with the fact, now these are something which have appeared in the editorial page. The US's WHO exit, a chance to reshape the global health. Now, this is again a continuation of the article which talks about the Trump administration's policy to withdraw from WHO. Now, how will that impact WHO? And more importantly, this article talks about how this can be utilized in order to restructure WHO and fill the existing gaps which are very much present. So, this is going to be relevant for your GS2 as well as for your GS3. Now, India-Indonesia ties as a beacon for global relations. Now, this is again a follow-up article. This has basically been written as a follow-up to the Indonesian president's visit on the eve of Republic Day and what it means for Indonesian ties going ahead into the future, a part of GS2. Then, the learning steps. This is about the requirement of greater funding associated with education, as is the case with every year's budget, and this has been the case for almost a couple of decades and more now. After the budget, you will come across a slew of articles which talk about the requirement of greater amount of investment in education, in healthcare as well. It is important for us to understand that why that investment is needed and in which particular areas will that investment help. So here, this is relevant basically again for your GS3. Then the financial toxicity of cancer care in India. This is about lack of funding provisions in terms of cancer care and other health care, and what can be done going ahead into the future to make the lives of the cancer patients much easier. Now, having said that, here we shall utilize this particular article in order to understand the overall generic problem that the healthcare industry faces in our country, again associated with GS3. Then why the tax cuts are a one-way gamble. This talks about the cyclical process where if, let's suppose, the tax buoyancy doesn't come in, these tax cuts are going to lead to further expenditure issues. So we are going to deliberate on that as well. GS3. And then beggar than thy neighbor policy. That is US's plan to increase the tariffs on its neighbors and other countries as well. So what is that policy? What is its future course of action? So this is relevant for GS2 in IR and the trade, GS3. Now, some of the articles relevant for the prelims is what we will extract out of it. Now, having said that, before we move ahead with the first topic, an announcement for all of you that if you want to attain or achieve your dream of clearing the civil services examination in the first attempt, we are launching multiple different batches in bilingual, in Hindi as well as in English medium. So a fresh batch starts on 11th of Feb for English medium. Do join that batch. Use the code IAS English and avail discounts. Now, having said that, let us begin with the discussion of the first topic of the day. The topic is the US's WHO exit, a chance to reshape global health. Now, Donald Trump has been in office for a few weeks now. And already the number of news headlines which are rolling out of US has been at an unprecedented rate. Now, amongst one of the first executive orders signed by Donald Trump was marking US's exit from WHO. Now, why is it? First of all, you have to understand the rationale behind the Trump administration's decision. Why is it that they took this decision? The reason that they took this decision was because they understood, or the understanding rather, was that they are contributing much more to the WHO on an annual basis as compared to countries like China, who have much greater amount of population. And Trump, in his own words, basically cited that this is injustice which is being done to the US because annually US does, and every country contributes some amount of money to the WHO. Now, that amount of money that you contribute to the WHO is not about how many sick people are there in your country. It is something which has been decided for a long time owing to the developmental parameters, the contributing conditions, the contributing abilities, and the larger public health across the globe. So here, in this article, let us remove the clutter otherwise and let us talk about and understand the crisp issues faced by WHO and what is it that the world can do in order to fill the gap which has been created by US's withdrawal. So first of all, why is it that this is a major concern for everyone? So the issues which are there. You see, just like any other institution, WHO has also been referred to as one of those archaic institutions which need reform. Now, reform is required everywhere. So is the case with WHO. But just because an institution requires reform does not mean it is absolutely dysfunctional. So WHO has got its own way of working. Yes, the number of staff that is there, that requires rationalization. The headquarters of WHO, now it no longer needs to be present in the developing nations, because the developing nations, if they are going to continue to reduce the amount of funding that they provide to the WHO, then overall the medical facilities, etc., that should shift to the developing and underdeveloped nations as well. So what are the issues faced? First of all, now US has been amongst the largest contributors of money to WHO on an annual basis. Now, why is it that WHO requires funds on an annual basis? In order to keep the administrative staff, in order to keep the trained professionals, in order to continue with the vaccination programs, in order to continue with the immunization programs. So there are multiple different programs running simultaneously. The administrative costs are there. So they will suffer with the US's withdrawal of funding mechanism. So that is a major factor. So withdrawal of US's annual contribution will have a dent of close to around $300 to $400 million annually to WHO's budget, which is massive. Then the other way in which WHO does receive its fund is with the help of the voluntary contributions, what are also referred to as the VCs. These are not venture capitalists, by the way. These are voluntary contributions. Now, the voluntary contributions which do happen, that is by civil society organizations, a large group of philanthropists, for example. For example, when you see the work done by the Bill and the Melinda Gates Foundation in India. So such kind of groupings, they provide some amount of funding to the WHO. But the problem with this funding is that this is not regular. It is not as if this funding is being provided on a regular basis, on an annual basis. It will be only event specific or disease specific. For example, let's suppose when the economy of the world is not doing very well. Now, these voluntary contributions will always go down. Now, if the world economy is not doing well, means what? People won't have enough money to get themselves treated in the case of the onset of a particular disease. So that means at that point of time, they need a greater amount of support from institutions like and bodies like WHO. But at that point of time itself, if the funding dries up, then people are left out in the lurch. So that is where this voluntary contributions, they are not reliable. They are sporadic in nature. They can happen and then for a long period of time they can dry up. So they are not regular, And also in many of the cases, they are disease specific. For example, a group of individuals, let's suppose, or an NGO group, let's suppose, contributes to take care of the disease like malaria. Now, they would not want those funds to be devolved and utilized, let's suppose, in taking care of the patient suffering from HIV. So, it is very much working in a silo, and that means unreliable. Then, there is a growing sense of hyper-nationalism. Every country is looking into its own. Now, in the face of this protectionism and hyper-nationalism, the country first policy, the world will come later, that is when not only the professionals who are being supplied to the WHO, the trained professionals, but overall sum also dries up, leading to further issues and exaggeration of the issues as well. The need of reforms cannot be highlighted more. It is required. WHO is in urgent need to carry out reforms in terms of the staffing, in terms of how it deals with certain diseases, in terms of the repository that it maintains, in terms of the overall vaccination programs that it operates. Everywhere the need of reform is there. Due to the lack of reform, it still operates in a very archaic manner, due to which inequality in terms of provision of services is very apparent and the world is not able to do anything about it. Now, there is a lack of attention to diseases like the Mpox, for example. That is why I am talking about the need for reforms. Now, Mpox, if you think about it, where is it more prevalent? If I give you two options, out of America and out of Africa, where is it that you will find this disease to be more apparent and more common? Always in the case of Africa. Now, as long as the disease had been prominently existent in the region of Africa, it still is existent. The world turned a blind eye. It was at that point of time that institutions and bodies like WHO should have stepped in, but that did not happen. Only when this disease started affecting people of richer countries like the US, that is when greater amount of money and resource was poured in to develop the vaccines. Now, the vaccines which are available, now they are available in large masses in the region of Americas, where the incidence of the disease is less. But there are a lot of vaccines lying out there in waste. In the countries like Democratic Republic of Congo and other countries of sub-Saharan Africa, where the incidence of the disease is very high, there is lack of medicines, lack of vaccines. This is where WHO had to step in. If all the countries had to deal with the diseases on their own and inequality in terms of the global medical order would be so apparent, then why did we require WHO in the first place? So that is where there is a need to reform the system. And this is one of the major issues. But then, the issues you would have talked about multiple times before that as well. How is it that moving ahead countries like India can pitch in? So first of all, the rationalization of costs is required. Shift the headquarters of WHO to the areas in Asia, or let's suppose regional headquarters in Africa. That is where the requirement will be more, and also you will end up saving a lot of money in terms of the rental cost, in terms of the operation cost, the administrative cost, etc. So that is very much required. This will also give the people a perception that the global body is at their doorstep to take care of them. This will repose the faith in the global institutions, which is eroding like quicksand right now. Then, reforming the WHO. That is, all the reforms that we have talked about in terms of staffing, in terms of how do they treat the diseases, in terms of handling the inequality, and so on. Contribution by other groupings. Now you see, when a large country like US withdraws, that is the time where you have to plug the gap. And how do you plug the gap? That is where the role of countries such as India and the groupings such as BRICS, G7, G20, all those groupings need to pitch in. However, having said that, the reality of the world that we live in presently is that once the once the countries realize that US is withdrawing its amount of financial support, the other countries will feel it very natural to withdraw that support as well. So that is why there is a need to provide that funding in order to repose the faith. Then, training of professionals. This is where countries like India can come in. Now, in India, we have a large pool of paramedical staff and also number of people who are interested in pursuing a paramedical degree course. Now, those staff can be trained not only in the diseases which are having a significant incidence in India, but also those diseases which are prominently found in the region around Africa. Now, this will solve two purposes. The first purpose it will solve is it will provide much required skilling of the population. Large amount of population will find a kind of a meaningful employment. Secondly, it will also help develop the expertise and the data pool within our country in order to deal with the different types of diseases. Those skilled professionals, those trained individuals who, let's suppose, have lived in Africa, have lived in East Asia, in the region of the Pacific Islands, and they have dealt with the diseases, they will have a substantial positive amount of input which they can provide to our own national health system as well. So our own domestic health system will also get promoted here and will benefit. So two contributions. First, youth will get greater amount of skilling, jobs, money. Second, you will have better health facilities in India, more trained professionals in India as well. Now, as the world is dealing with hyper-nationalism, everyone is looking inwards. Everyone is trying to think about that how should we serve our country? How should we develop our country? Now, keeping in line with that, because you cannot alienate this kind of a national sentiment, so keeping in line with that, countries like India, we should try to or seek to develop regional multi-speciality centers, right? So premier institutes at regional levels where they can always end up providing greater expertise and a kind of medical tourism, not only for the own country, but the surrounding regions. Now, this is where they can partner with WHO to gain expertise in certain areas. For example, the neglected tropical diseases which are there, communicable diseases, lifestyle diseases, and so on, and hence reclaim the prominence of WHO back in the global spectrum. So these are some of the steps which are required along with the issues which are faced by WHO. So in this article, what have we seen? Why is it that US has withdrawn? First of all, that is the context around which the article has been written. Now, if US has withdrawn, money will dry up. So if money will dry up, what are the other issues faced by WHO? And then what is the way forward in order to reform the global health system? From here, because this has been in so much news, this is a kind of a question which can always be expected. Discuss the issues faced by global institutions like WHO and suggest the measures which can be taken by countries in order to address the issue of global health. This is a kind of a question that is very much expected in the lines of subjective in UPSC. So how do you create the answer out of it? So in the intro, you talk about the role of WHO in global health. Okay? Role of WHO. So WHO is a global the global body, apex organization, taking care of the health issues across the world in terms of consultations, in terms of interventions such as medicine as well as vaccination supply and so on. Just keep it very brief. Now, after that, you talk about the issues faced. However, with the turn of the decade and the rise of the pandemic like COVID, issues faced by WHO have been on the rise. Issues associated with biasness, perceived biasness, issues associated with funding, issues associated with inequality, issues associated with the lack of reforms, lack of trust, all that you can talk about. Because if you recall, all of this began when? When was it triggered? After WHO was seen to be absolutely biased towards China in terms of handling of the COVID pandemic. How WHO handled the COVID pandemic, it is alleged led to many more deaths. So after that point of time, the perception started changing. So that is all that you have to talk about. Obviously, in a point sub-paragraph manner is how you discuss this. And then eventually talk about the way forward. So in the issue faced, so biasness, then funding, then reforms, lack of them, lack of reforms, inequality, and then write the way forward. Try writing the answer and let's see how many marks you are able to score. Now moving to the second article. The second article is about the India-Indonesian ties as a beacon of global relations. Now again, it is a kind of a follow-up of the the January 27th article, which talked about the Indo-Indonesian ties. Now, let us discuss here in 3 points or 3 major agendas what this entire article is about. Now, India and Indonesia, they have a rich shared past, post-colonialism obviously, and prior to that as well. Our ties, they extend much deeper, not only in terms of the political relationship or the economic relationship, but also to the cultural level. You have a kind of a Balinese culture impacted by or influenced by Hinduism, and the Hindu cultural roots, they are found to be in Indonesia. At the same time, both the countries, they have a significant minority population also. So there are sensitivities in terms of the society that both the countries share. Having said that, after independence or post-colonization, after the decolonization phase happened, that is when these countries, they formed a closer bond, with India providing a kind of a no passageway to the Dutch plains over it that helped and aided Indonesia. So you had various relief missions flown by the Indian Air Force at that point of time. Imagine Indian Air Force, which was incapacitated after the British rule. Still, they carried out rescue missions in Indonesia. So we have a shared mutual respect as well. When it came to the Cold War era and the world was splitting up into the 2 different blocks of the 2 superpowers, the Soviet Union and the US, India and Indonesia were amongst the nations who decided to walk the path of non-alignment. So that is again where you had a kind of a shared relation. So when we talk about the basis of relation, the basis of relation is on the labyrinth and the plinth of anti-colonialism. Then non-aligned movement is where our principles, they matched. The cultural similarity, the deeper roots, and then the handling of the minority population. So these are some of the critical cultural, societal, political areas where we have a shared benefit. Also, one has to keep in mind that in the modern day era, in the modern context, both India and Indonesia, we also have a shared concern when it comes to climate change. Because both of us, we suffer from the impact of climate change. The impact is humongous. At the same time, India and Indonesia represent amongst the fastest growing economies across the world, where the global average of growth is close to around 3.3%. That is the global growth average. India is reported to grow at around 6.5 or 6.4%, while Indonesia is expected to grow around 5 odd percent as well. So both the countries are leading from the forefront in terms of economic growth. So some shared basis can be issue of climate change, trade, also handling of biodiversity. You see, we share a biodiversity hotspot with Indonesia, what is known as the Sundaland Biodiversity Hotspot. The Sundaland Biodiversity Hotspot, which lies in the Javan Sumatran Islands primarily, also extends to the Great Nicobar Islands in India, where you have very vital kind of biodiversity like the horseshoe crabs, leatherback turtle, all of them, they are to be found, megapods included. So the handling of the environment is a vital shared cause of concern moving ahead into the future. Now, this is the basis on which the relation is built. Having said that, what are the common concerns that both the countries they face? The areas where they can cooperate upon. So, food and energy security, post the Ukraine war, post the Middle East crisis. This is very much a global concern, particularly for countries which have a large section of the poorer population. They cannot afford to have insecurity in terms of food supply because that would immediately mean scarcity of food. Energy security as well, because the commodity prices like oil, crude, etc., the global prices are skyrocketing. Now, as a consequence of that, countries across the world are facing the bout of inflation, and that has reduced the fiscal space of the governments in order to carry out their own programs. So, energy security is very, very vital. Then, healthcare, another area of concern. In developing countries in general, where you have a larger underserved population, underserved as in the population which is not so good to do or well to do economically, they have to be helped. So, healthcare is another area where both of them have a common concern. Manufacturing and technology is where it requires a greater amount of collaboration. Both the countries can work upon each other's expertise in this particular regard as well, from the agro products to the technology, let's suppose the services, that is software. That is where India has got to contribute a lot more. Then overall, if you consider the trade as well, right, trade will also come in this particular portion itself. Now, trade is heavily underutilized. The global trade between India and Indonesia is close to around $20 billion. Estimates are that it can be quadrupled 4 times in only 10 years. That much is the scope. Investment is also limited. For example, when we talk about Indian investment into Indonesia, it is around $1.5 billion. Whereas Indonesian investment in India is close to around $600 million. So there is a lot of scope for investment as well. Then other concerns, counter-terrorism and cybersecurity. Then sanctions which are imposed again in terms of which will impact the food and energy security post the Ukraine war. The Russian supply, now both India and Indonesia have enjoyed good relations with Russia. So that is where both the countries are getting impacted. And we share global platforms like G20 and the BRICS. Indonesia has formally joined the BRICS, where it, along with India and China, they form a larger influential group in the Asia Pacific region. So there is a lot of common area where collaboration can happen, where they can address global issues. Having said that, what is required to galvanize this relationship, to re-energize this relationship moving ahead? Because these are large sections of population in the developing world which are diverse, which are culturally rooted to the land, and the diversity is something which the world needs as of now. So here, what is it that both the countries can do going ahead? So basically, deepening of supply chains that will improve the not only the cooperation, the penetration of business in both the countries, and as a consequence, the economic output. Expertise can be shared by both the countries. Investments in clean energy sector, and clean energy here is the need of the hour. So Indonesia also being amongst the tropical regions, in the tropical region that can extract a lot of solar power. There is an increased production of solar panels and solar devices in India. So there is a scope of much greater cooperation. Along with the wind energy, solar energy, cooperation is the requirement and the scope is very high. Infrastructure connectivity, infrastructure in terms of maritime connectivity. For example, the region around Sabang, the SA Andaman connectivity routes, they need to be again revitalized. Increased defense cooperation is required. Lack of common strategic view, this needs to be addressed. Because when it comes to the global order, you cannot say that India and Indonesia, they have a common strategic view. We might have shared interest, we might have shared concerns, but we need to develop that common strategic view in the sense, how do we view the world 20 years from now? What should be the concern? What should be the areas to address? And then the commodities trade. You see, Indonesia has got a rich amount of mineral resource, from nickel to cobalt to coal, etc. And that can copper as well. So that is where countries like India can benefit. This will help us diversify our supply chain, and also it will give us an alternative where the supply chain is held captive by the Chinese influence. So these are where much greater amount of cooperation and coordination can happen. So what have we discussed in the article in brief? What is the basis of relation between India and Indonesia till now? On what are the common concerns that both of us share? And how is it that we can move ahead? We have seen that pre-colonialism also we have cultural ties. Then post-colonialism, we have a kind of an oppression that both the countries have faced due to the colonialists. We have seen that basically non-aligned movement, anti-colonialist movement, cultural minorities, all of them, we have a deep-rooted past. Trade, etc., environment, climate change concern. Then we have seen the existing areas of investment, trade, etc., commodities, food and energy security, clean energy are the areas where further cooperation can happen. Okay. Now, let us take a look at the practice question which can be framed from here. Discuss the importance of India-Indonesian relations in maintaining the multipolar world order. So here, when you write the answer, talk about India and Indonesia, the demography of them in the region of South Asia and Southeast Asia. So India, the countries of India and Indonesia represent amongst the most populous regions in the micro area or in the Asia Pacific. So then talk about that how India and Indonesia have a shared past. From there, that will give you the historical perspective. So talk about the historical perspective that they do have a shared past. Talk about the fact that they do have a significant amount or regions of cooperation. Then how they can, because it is talking about the multipolar world order. So how do you talk about or frame your answer in order to address the multipolar world order? So basically, after, let's suppose you have written the intro, you have started the body with the shared past. Then after that, talk about the global ills, issues of common concern. Now that is where you can talk about, for example, the case of commodities. Then you can talk about the food and energy security, cyber security, counter-terrorism, these things, environment, climate change, these are the areas to cooperate. Then how do they shape? How and when do they shape the global order? So cooperation across global platforms and institutions like the G20 and BRICS helps them or provides them an opportunity to shape the global agenda to serve the larger underserved or poorer population that the countries have. This also will lend the voice to the global south in general and shift the balance of the world, which is presently unipolar, towards multipolarism. This will also help in strengthening of the global institutions, because if countries like India, Indonesia, they have to remove the social malaise like the diseases, etc., they need a stronger WHO. If they need funding, they need a stronger, let's suppose, the Asian Development Bank or the IMF, and like that you talk about and emphasize on the multipolarity, how they will strengthen the multipolarity. Okay. Now, after that, moving on to the third article. The third article, that is the learning steps. Now you see, as the budget was presented, this budget marked a slight increase in the amount of allocation to the education sector, both at the primary level as well as the higher secondary level. Having said that, this still does not match the revised estimate of the overall expenditure that happened in education last year. But even if let us assume that we carry out greater amount of expenditure this year, still overall our contribution to education as a proportion of GDP will remain very low. So here we talk about the fact that India must further strengthen its investment in school education. Now you see the budget announcement, they have done certain major announcements. For example, the AI Center of Excellence for Education with an allocation of 500 crores, broadband connectivity for schools, more Atal Tinkering Labs, innovation centers, then the expansion of 5 third generation IITs, more number of seats there, more fellowships, then increased funding of the Indian knowledge system. There are certain steps which are included. But it is also a reality that when it comes to the primary funding, for example, now when we talk about education, education is something which the states cater to. The states have that under its own ambit. Now within that, different states have different policies. Now center, when it allocates the budget, it generally tries to reform the or fill the gap through Kendriya Vidyalaya institutes, etc. Now even in these Kendriya Vidyalayas, now, the amount of funding which is required, oftentimes the problem raised and the issue raised by the states is that much amount of funding is not provided. That much amount of allocation is not done. Okay, so that has always been the case here. So that is why this article talks about the concerns raised. So let us talk about the overall concerns. So to support the reforms which the government has suggested in terms of the UGC reform, for example, the kind of the 4-year degree programs, the ability or the availability of a facility where the students can avail the degree from multiple different institutions, allowing students to take courses across multiple institutions, structural reforms which are required, that requires funding. So with reduced funding, you cannot achieve all of that. Now, ACER report which has been released recently talked about the learning outcomes. That is your ACER report. ACER report. So it talks about the learning outcomes. It has indicated previously that the learning outcome have not increased one generation after another. During the COVID years, the pandemic years, there had been a sharp decline in terms of the learning outcome. Now, the latest ACER report indicates that this COVID decline has been arrested and has been recovered. Having said that, there is still a lot to be desired in terms of the FLN number, that is foundational literacy and numeracy. Now, what is that? That is the basic know-how of arithmetic, the basic idea of perceiving what the literary matter is, which is done at the pre-primary or the primary level. So that is the FLN. Now FLN is improving and has improved to the pre-COVID levels, but that still needs to be accelerated much higher. So that would require what? If you want to improve the FLN, that means investment in primary education. Okay, investment in primary education. Now here, when we talk about this investment in primary education, we have already talked about the condition of the Kendriya Vidyalayas. Whichever region that you are living in whichever part of the country, other than few of the metropolitan cities, the Kendriya Vidyalayas in almost all the states are in a very dilapidated and a poor condition. So that needs change. That needs to be reformed. So that is where a greater amount of funding allocation needs to be provided. Now, when we talk about the existing condition, if you want to improve the FLN, if you want to improve the overall educational condition, then what is your the way forward, or what is the planning that the government seeks to do? So the government, in its various strategic plans, etc., and even as per the new education policy, aims to deploy volunteers and even Anganwadi workers in order to cater to the pre-primary levels up till around class 3. Right, the 5+3+3 system that the government have, +3+3+2. So that system of schooling that the government has come up with. So up till class 3, the pre-primary level, Anganwadi workers are supposed to be deployed. Now, Anganwadi workers in majority of the regions are already underpaid or unpaid, right? Either underpaid or unpaid. So they are not remunerated or compensated as per the demands of work that they have. Be it TB, there also you deploy Anganwadi. Be it immunization program, there also Anganwadis are deployed. Be it the ration program, there also Anganwadis are deployed. Be it the case of education, there also you deploy the Anganwadi workers. So they are overworked. So an overworked individual who is not compensated or is unpaid, you cannot expect them to deliver quality educational outcomes. So there will be a persistent gap in terms of what is desired and what is going in the input. So that gap needs to be filled, right? So that is the major demand of this particular article. So it is about the way forward. So when we talk about way forward in terms of education, you see, it is where you have to invest in primary sector or primary education. Then increase the funding of the volunteer groups. Increase funding of volunteer groups. In terms of primary education. Then, other than that, you also require the government to step in terms of innovation requirement, greater amount of investment in innovation. Whatever there has been investment, let's suppose in tinkering labs at the school level, etc., but that needs to be scaled up, right? Scaling up of existing investment. Scaling up of existing investments. Right? So these are some of the steps which can be taken going forward. Now that is a brief article. This is the nutshell around it. This you can apply overall, this template, in any aspect of the requirement of education, the issues of education going forward. Now, after this, we come to an article which talks about the budget. Right now, you have been flooded with multiple articles about budget ever since the first of the month. But this article basically talks about the financial toxicity of cancer care in India. Again, this is about the budgetary allocation to healthcare. This is relevant for your GS paper 3. Now, when we talk about cancer, it is one of the debilitating diseases that people suffer through, and that is where the impact is humongous, not only on the individual who is suffering, but also on the loved ones, the family members. The impact is humongous. Now, in India, we have poor diagnostic, testing and treatment facilities. As a consequence, oftentimes cancer is detected in very late stage. And all of you would be aware that when cancer is detected in a late stage, not only is the amount of money required for treatment very high, the amount of interventions required very high, but also the outcome is not always positive. The outcomes can be very negative as well. So, cancer patients, they suffer in different parts of the country. But that is the case with overall healthcare sector as well. Now, health again is a part of the state subject, but when it comes to the central allocation of the funds, that has been hovering around 2% for a long period of time. It is not that overnight you can increase this 2% to 5%. It cannot be done, but at least you can show the upward trend and the upward tick in terms of the overall budgetary allocation to healthcare which is done. Now, why is it required? Why is it required to give additional amount of funding to healthcare? So, let us talk about the arguments with respect to the cancer patients. So, when we talk about the cancer patients and in general in terms of the healthcare, the out-of-pocket expenditure is very high. You see, when we talk, or the WHO had come out with a report which talked about the fact that in India, 70% of the out-of-pocket expenditure that an individual household does is on healthcare, be it availing the tests, getting the tests done, that is, be it going for the medicines, be it transportation or the requirement of the nutritious food, post-diagnosis, everything is out-of-pocket expenditure. So that is amongst the highest amount of expenditure that an individual household does. That brings about impoverishment in many family setups. Now, even when we talk about cancer care, let's suppose, now inpatient treatment, that is covered under Ayushman Bharat programs like that. But what about the transportation cost? What about the fooding cost? What about the diagnostic cost? In many of the cases, this is not covered. So states like Maharashtra, for example, states like, for example, Delhi, they have augmented the central scheme with their own scheme to cover many of these particular factors as well. But then overall, the patients are under stress, economic stress because of that. Now, coverage is restricted. Now, coverage here, when we are talking about schemes like Ayushman Bharat. Like Ayushman Bharat. Okay. Now, after that, when you go to the the public healthcare system, you find there is a shortage of staff. If the staff is there, equipment is not there. If the equipment is there, staff is also there, equipment is not working. If both of them are working, that is, the staff is also working, equipment is also there, equipment is also working, it is already a very rare case. So then in that case, there is so much of a queue that you will get your test diagnostic done maybe after a month of continuously running from pillar to post. So there is a delay in diagnostics, and as a consequence, the expenditure shoots up. So that is a major problem. As a consequence, people are oftentimes diverted towards the private healthcare, and the private healthcare facilities are mushrooming across the country. Healthcare business in general is close to around 8 lakh crores in India, with a CAGR of around 20%. So think about the scope. So private healthcare is there to basically get a large piece of pie. Now, you cannot expect the private sector and tomorrow issue a diktat that private sectors and the private hospitals should do everything for free. That is basically an irrational expectation. What you can do is fulfill the gaps which exist in the public healthcare system so that poorer population, right, the population, the lower middle class, the poorer class, they are the ones who are able to avail and who don't need to go to the private healthcare facility. Now, these are the issues which the cancer patients they face. Now, how to address the issue? So, state schemes, the state government, as I told you, Maharashtra, Delhi, etc., they have come up with their own complementary schemes. Schemes such as Haryana has come up with a scheme where the bus travel is free for cancer patients, right? So, transportation, then diagnostics, then arrange the stay, arrange food, that is nutrition. That is where the state under whose ambit the healthcare sector comes, they can pitch in, they can contribute, which is required. But at the same time, you have a huge role of NGOs also when it comes to diseases like cancer. Because the medicines for diseases like cancer, extraordinarily costly, very costly, out of bounds from the normal individual. But then, what many of the NGOs and civil society groups have been doing successfully for the past few years now, they buy these medicines in bulk. So as a consequence, the overall price goes down. Now, as an individual, you cannot buy bulk medicines. But as a larger group, as a larger civil society organization, you can very much do it. So that is when the price comes down. As the price comes down, it is easier for the individuals to avail that. So the role of NGOs is instrumental. Other than that, there has to be an increased funding in terms of the public healthcare setup. public health care. Now, when you talk about public health care, even in your essay or any of the paper, you have to ensure that you write about it, that investment in public health care starts from the primary health care centers. Primary health care centers, super specialty, all of that requires investment. Public health care I'm talking about. Then CSR investments can also be directed towards cancer research, towards better immunization programs, etc. So that is where we can avail or we can bridge the shortfall in terms of funding. But this is a sector which needs urgent care, because this is one of the issues which leads to the vicious cycle of poverty, which at one point of time was talked about by Karl Marx. Now, Marxism as a thought process is not very kind of popular right now, and fair enough. But some of the aspects talked about by Marxism and by Karl Marx in particular, they are very, very practically implementable. For example, let us take a look at this vicious cycle of poverty. Now, Marx talked about the fact that you have large population with low income. Right? The income level is very low. So, as a consequence, spend on education and healthcare, or rather combined, you can refer to it as human capital. The spend on human capital by the masses is very low. Isn't it? Now, as a consequence of that, what is the outcome? Poor health metrics, malnutrition, undernourishment, disease, etc., and low skill level. Poor health, and poor skills. Now, any individual or any population group which has got poor health and poor skill level, their employability, efficiency, everything goes down. A person who is undernourished or malnourished, you cannot expect them to work perfectly fine in a manufacturing sector, in a service sector, in any sector for that matter. So, employability goes down. When employability goes down, as a consequence, it again recreates the condition of a large population with a very low income. This is Marxian vicious cycle of poverty. So, unless and until we break this cycle, we will have a large section of population who will still be in the lower middle class always. So, how do you break this cycle? You break this cycle by breaking the chain here. So, that spend on the human capital, this should be catered by the state. Okay, the state should be taking care of it. So, that is how we can go ahead and proceed forward for a more egalitarian society as well. Now, after that, coming to the next article. Now, this next article talks about why the tax cuts are a kind of a one-way gamble. Now, when we talk about the tax cuts which have been introduced in the budget, they are basically about providing relief to the middle class, right? Now, this tax cut which has been introduced, they go a long way in terms of creating the demand. That is the expectation, that they will put some money in the hand of the middle class, that will create demand for the middle class, and they will buy more products that will create or kickstart a virtuous cycle of growth. But this article, on the other hand, argues that it is a well and a virtuous path to go down, but also one has to be wary of the fact and the other possibilities that it can lead to reduced tax collection. Because you see, when you collect tax, that is what you spend as a government, isn't it? You collect tax and you spend that. So, if your tax collections are reduced, then your spending capability will be reduced. And that spending capability in vital government welfare programs like Jal Jeevan Mission, like for example, the cleanliness mission, etc., can have a long-term impact on healthcare, etc. So by reducing the tax, the article argues that are we putting all the eggs in one basket? What is that basket? Expecting the demand to grow up. What if the demand doesn't grow up? Then what? So here, let us explore this further. So basically, when we talk about the case of the tax cuts which have been done in the case of the budget, just a moment. So when we talk about the tax cuts here, so in the entire framework, a logic which has been framed by the government. Now you see, the government has reduced the tax, exempting many crores of population who no longer need to fill the tax, lakhs of population who don't need to fill the tax anymore. But still, its expectation from the next financial year is that the direct tax revenue can go up by around 14 to 20%. So how is it possible? That is possible owing to the factor which is known as tax buoyancy. Now, what is tax buoyancy? Tax buoyancy talks about the relation between the tax collected and the GDP growth. So it talks about the fact that as the GDP grows, the tax collected from the particular economy also tends to grow proportionately. So that is tax buoyancy. So the expectation overall has been that, look, if we are exempting the population from tax, that means they will have a lot of money, they will spend, that will kickstart the supply chain demand, and as a consequence, the manufacturing will progress, as a consequence, the GDP will grow, and hence the tax collections will grow. However, when we talk about the cyclical impact, you have to understand that if this virtuous cycle does not kick off, what does that mean? That means basically that tax collected can be low. Tax collected can be lower. If the tax collected is lower, as a consequence, the expenditure will be lower. Expenditure will also be lower. Now, this on the face of the fact that the government is very keen, and the government is particularly addressing the fiscal deficit target. As per the FRBM, the government cannot endlessly spend in terms of various capital expenditure, etc. So it has to restrict itself. Now the government has in fact went ahead and aggressively expanded the target for fiscal deficit. It has reduced it from 5% of the GDP to around 4.8%. And basically, all the estimates of the previous expenditure of the previous year indicate that the government is very serious in terms of ensuring the fiscal consolidation. Now, fiscal consolidation is very important for the trust in the market, the trust in the economy, and the functioning of the economy as well. So there, fiscal consolidation is required. But in case the tax collection does not happen and you are targeting fiscal consolidation, that means you will be spending less in capital, education, healthcare, etc. So that means you are trapped in a kind of a cycle. Fiscal policy, as is argued in the article, is always aimed to break the cycle, to ensure that wherever investments are not happening, there you kickstart the investment. Now here, the argument which is made from the side of the government is that post-COVID, we have been investing a lot in terms of capital expenditure. It is basically the public expenditure which has kept the economy running post-COVID, because the private expenditure has dried up. The private investments have dried up. So it is the public investment, particularly in infrastructure sector, etc., which has kept the economy running. So that is where the government is running out of space, and now it is expecting that the export and the private investment will kickstart the economy. But again, exports in the current situation of hyper-nationalism and protectionism across the globe, and you are expecting Donald Trump to impose tariff any day now. And in that scenario, exports cannot be expected to be in an optimistic light. Overall, if you take a look at it, then this has led to some of the cuts in terms of the expenditure in flagship schemes. For example, Jal Jeevan Mission. there has been a cut of around 47,000 crores. Then PM Awas 22,000 crores, PM Awas Urban 16,000 crores, PM Garib Kalyan more than 8,000 crores of budgetary cut. All this budgetary cut that is being done is to ensure consolidation, fiscal consolidation. Now, fiscal consolidation means keeping your expenditure in check. But if you are unable to collect revenue, then what will you do? You are aiming, or you are actually heading to a kind of a gluttony or a kind of a recessionary cycle. That is what the article warns about. So what you have to focus upon? So basically you have to focus upon, in this particular aspect, what is the aim of the tax cut? That cycle you have to understand, which I am sure you would be clear by now, that 5 days after the tax or the budget session. Then second thing you have to focus upon is that what happens if that virtuous cycle does not kick in. Third thing that you have to focus upon is that if you want to maintain fiscal consolidation as per the FRBM Act, then as a consequence, what will be the overall impact? Okay. Now, one of the last major articles, how beggar thy neighbor policies can make global trade come to a standstill. Beggar thy neighbor policy. That is something which was popularized during the 1700s, in fact, during the times of Adam Smith, and more precisely 1776. So, Adam Smith, who basically authored the book, The Wealth of Nations, he was the one who coined the term. Now, what is that beggar thy neighbor? So, basically, if you are a country, you want the industries in your country to progress. So, what do? You have neighboring countries with whom you have trade relations. Now, in order to ensure that your companies, they are much more healthier, they are much more richer, what you do is you impose tariffs on both the ends. So, as a consequence, your neighbor, they will not be able to export goods to you. When do you impose tariffs? Well, let's suppose this is, let's take the case of Canada and US itself. Canada, US, Mexico. Now, if Canada is exporting anything to US, there's a 25% tariff. So, the product will become costly for the consumers. The consumers will never buy that. So, who will suffer? Canada. Mexico, when it supplies, let's suppose fruits, 47% of the fruits in US, they come from Mexico. Lime, lemons, then citrus fruits, then avocados, all of them, they are supplied from Mexico. Canada supplies crude to US. So, the Mexican goods will become costlier. Nobody is going to buy Mexican goods. So, both Canada and Mexico will go poorer. Beggar thy neighbor. Thy here, your. So, make your neighbor poorer. That was something which was initially in the 1700s popularized by the early mercantilists, who talked about the fact that if you want your country to grow, ensure protectionism, ensure that your industries are protected, there is tariff on the imports in your country. So, what if your neighbors go poor? You will prosper. That is when Adam Smith, when he wrote the very famous book, The Wealth of Nations, he critiqued this idea. And he talked about the fact that if you follow this policy of imposing tariffs, not only does it influence the common man, it is detrimental to the global economy and also to your economy in the long run. So that is what the article is basically about. So when we talk about tariffs and the era of protectionism, that is something which is upon us, and it is a reality. Now, basically, Canada has reimposed a 25% tariff on US goods. Mexico is threatening to reimpose again tariff of 25%. Now, it is a different matter that Trump basically issued this as a kind of a veiled threat, and now both the kind of tariff decisions across Canadian and the Mexican border, they have been pushed for a month. That is what has led to the Wall Street Journal calling this entire episode as the dumbest trade war in history. That is telling of what the outcome of it will be. Now, this counter tariff utilization, what it leads to? It leads to a situation where your own companies, organizations within your country. Now, organizations, you are protecting them within your country, thinking that if I impose tariff, let's suppose we consider the case of India and China. Now, China exports steel to us, right? Despite we manufacturing our own steel as well, we import steel. Now, if India, as it does, imposes a lot of tariffs on Chinese steel, means what? We are trying to protect our own steel makers. So, it can immediately, first of all, kickstart inflation. Inflation in the short run. Why? Because of fall in supply. The supply drops. Okay. So, that is when the organizations, in the light of protectionism, they tend to suffer. They don't get the exposure to better technologies. They don't get exposure to better efficient situation. Competition leads to the survival of the fittest. Without competition, you have inefficient organizations who have survived for too long, and we have seen multiple examples of them in our country itself. Then after that, basically the counter tariffs which are being imposed. Now there is an argument that counter tariff, China has also imposed tariff. Now should that be done or not? So let's consider, in this case, US, let's consider China. Now, for every good that US is getting from China, let's suppose US imposes a 20% tariff. So, as a consequence, what will happen? Exports in China, they will go down. When we talk about the exports will go down. Now, China and Japan, they have been accused in the recent past of manipulating their currency rates. In the sense, they devalue the currency. Whenever the currency depreciation happens, so as a consequence, the expectation is that the exports will go up. Exports will go up. Isn't it? So when the exports are falling because of imposition of tariff, China will always go for depreciation of the currency, devaluing of the currency. Now what will it lead to? It will again kickstart inflation. So think about the population of China. They will be suffering from inflation because of excess money supply. And secondly, for the consumers in China, now China will also impose a kind of a increased tariff, let's suppose 20% on US goods. So for the Chinese consumers, now the goods are costlier, inflation has kicked in, and maybe the exports have not picked up in the light of hyper-nationalism and protectionism. So that is where the argument is laid in this article, a beautiful argument is laid, that imposition of tariff does not always necessitate a counter tariff imposition. It does not always mean there has to be a counter tariff. It can basically mean let one country impose the tariff, you utilize that tariff which is being imposed to diversify your market, and if you reimpose the tariff on US again, you are going to impact your own consumers. That is where you have seen that in the budgetary cycle, India has given some of the signals to the US that we are open to lowering the rates, the tariff rates. So that is where the consumers will, when do the consumers benefit? When the overall cost is less. So what is the gist of the article? Beggar thy neighbor. What is that? Provided by Adam Smith. What is that? That is when you impose high tariffs from the trade carried out by your neighbors. That is beggar thy neighbor. So in that, what you are trying to do? protectionist economy, protect your own organization and functioning of the organizations from imports, from competition, etc. But that is not healthy in the long run. So various countries are doing what? Counter tariff. So that counter tariff utilization, that will always oppress the consumers in the long run. Okay? Try writing about this in your own around 50 words. That will improve your answer writing skills as well. Now coming to a few of the articles in very short about the prelims. Now there has been an article which talks about the fact that farmers and activists have talked and said that 500 crore budgetary allocation for cotton in terms of the cotton mission, that is insufficient. So let us utilize this to understand about cotton. So what are the issues that are faced in cotton cultivation in India right now? So as per the various estimates, first of all, the major issue is there is a decline in the yield. The amount of cotton produced in 2014-15, now it is less. So there is a decline in yield. Overall yield also, yield per hectare also. Secondly, we are not even producing what is the demand as of now. So we are staring at a shortage in the near term future. Thirdly, there has been a similar pattern of cultivation of cotton for a very long period of time. There is a lack of innovation, due to which there is a reduced productivity. Then the impact of bollworm. Now you see, there has been no new seed which has been introduced for a long time. Now Bollgard 2 is still the seed which is used. So now it is being used for a long time now. Initially it had good returns, but now almost 35 to 40% of the cotton crop is destroyed by this bollworm infection. 35 to 40%. And the Bollgard 3 seed is one of those which has still not received the in principle approval from the appraisal committee. So again, newer seeds are not supplied in the market. So these are the issues that the cotton sector faces. Then, more important for your prelims also, what are the conditions required for the cotton crop? So cotton is a kharif crop. The sowing starts to happen in the month of April, May. Sometimes it basically extends to the month of June, post the monsoonal rainfall. Okay. Now, annual rainfall of 50 to 100 centimeter is sufficient. Even if modern methods of irrigation are not available, still something which is sufficient. Temperature 22 to 37 degrees Celsius. However, at the time of germination, anything higher than 15 degrees Celsius, anything lower than 37, it is tolerable. Okay. 210 days of frost-free conditions. No frosting on the ground. Harvesting is done in the month of December and January. At that point of time, if the frost develops, the crop is destroyed. Soil condition. Now, cotton is semi-tolerant to salinity but sensitive to waterlogging. So, deep alluvial soil, black clay soil and mixed black and red soil are the kind of soils where cotton grows. The regions: Maharashtra, Gujarat, Malwa Plateau in Madhya Pradesh, Punjab, Andhra Pradesh. These are the major regions where cotton as a crop is cultivated. A direct question can be asked in the prelims from here. Now, this is an article about the black holes, right? And the study about black holes. So basically, considering the gist of it, what is a black hole? So black hole overall, they are huge concentrations of matter packed into very tiny spaces, very small spaces. It is so dense that everything collapses. Even light cannot escape the event horizon of the black hole, right? Now, what is the event horizon? It isn't a surface like the earth or the sun's surface, even though sun is largely constituted of gas. It is a boundary that contains all the matter that makes up the black hole. That is the event horizon. So what is a black hole and what is an event horizon, that you have to keep in mind. Now, some of the prominent features there of the black hole. So they don't emit or reflect light, making them invisible to the telescope. So how do the scientists detect it? They observe the movement of the stars. Now, sometimes the stars appear to be moving and rotating at high speeds around nothing. So that nothing is the black hole. So it is based upon this that the astronomers are able to calculate the speed of the stars and estimate where the black hole might be present. The black holes, few of them are known to emit X-rays. So by studying the X-rays, by looking at the movement of the star, where they are moving and around what they are moving, if they are unable to spot the central sun or a central body, that means there's a black hole. It is a work on this which basically was where Nobel Prize was awarded in 2024 as well. Now, having said that, when we talk about the factual data about the black hole, which is the closest black hole, you have the Gaia black hole, which is about 1500 light years away. That is the closest known black hole that we have. The study in the article indicated is also about the Gaia black hole. Now, the last article of the day, that is India to rethink OECD tax plan post the US exit. Now, OECD, that is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which was formed in 1961 by renaming of OEC. Now, that was about the development in the western portion of Europe after Second World War and in a way channelizing the Marshall Plan of US. Now, OECD for some time has been working on a global tax plan in order to take care of issues such as tax avoidance, which is done by multinational corporations like Google, Facebook, etc., fixing a minimum global tax rate. But US has decided to withdraw from this entire plan structure, which has made countries like India to think about the very purpose of joining these tax plans. So for your prelims, what is relevant is what is OECD. So OECD presently, by the way, has got 38 members. India is amongst the partner. India is not a member. India is amongst the partner. So it originated in 1948 as OEEC, Organization for European Economic Cooperation. Now, this was founded to govern the US-funded Marshall Plan for post-war reconstruction of Europe, more prominently Central and Western Europe. It was renamed as OECD in 1961 when US and Canada, they agreed to join. This is the list of the various different countries which are a member of the OECD, taking the number to 38. Okay, that is something relevant for your exams. Now, that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion has been helpful and has added some content to your existing knowledge set. If you have liked the content, if you have liked the discussion, do click on the like, share and the subscribe button. I also advise you to take a look at the multiple choice question quiz, which is on the Telegram channel, and thereby understand your assessment level. Till we meet again, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.